Welcome back to the Strength and Speed Podcast. I'm your host, Conquer the Gauntlet Pro Evan Preparis. Not joining me this week is Brenna Calvert. We do have another guest on the line, though. But before we get to that, a quick shout-out to some of our sponsors. So this episode is brought to you by Synergy Sports. Synergy Sports makes some great training tools for training for OCR. They have a thing called the Climber, so it's just a rotating set of infinite monkey bars. They have some rig grips. They have a pegboard attachment that essentially is a chain and hangs from the ceiling. Some pretty interesting stuff. So head over to synergysports.com if you haven't seen their stuff. Also, it's the home of Shale Hill, a permanent obstacle course facility in Benson, Vermont. They have a big event coming up at the end of the month. It is 24 hours of Shale Hill. So it's a 24-hour obstacle course race. So if you're in Vermont or you like ultra-ocr, I would check that out. Today's episode, we have a female powerlifter on, Jen Rotsinger. I'll give you a quick rundown of who she is in the powerlifting world. So previous and current all-time world record holder in the 52-kilogram class. Her best lifts include a 341-pound squat with sleeves, 203-pound bench, 423-pound deadlift, and a 386-pound squat in wraps. Jen is the lightest woman to ever total over 1,000 pounds and the first to do it in the 52-kilogram class. Her next goal is to total 1,000 pounds in sleeves. Current best is 942. And she started competing in 2004 in the geared days of powerlifting and has competed in more than 40 meets. Professionally, Jen is the co-owner of Gorilla Bench Training Center in Clearwater, Florida, Powerlifting Team Manager at Complete Human Performance, and a microbiologist with Kindred Healthcare. So, Jen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
Cool. Well, one of the things we do on this podcast is we try to bring in people from other sports. So, while initially I think a lot of our listeners may be wondering, what can you learn from powerlifting for obstacle course racing, I think we're going to get there, especially considering stuff like mindset and preparing for single rep max movements.
Sure.
But before we get there, for those who may not know, let's just give me like a rundown of what is powerlifting, what essentially lifts do you compete in, and we'll go from there.
Well, powerlifting is a strength sport, 1 rep max competitions, squat, bench, and deadlift in that order. So you get 3 attempts for a squat, 3 attempts for a bench, and then 3 attempts for a deadlift. If you, sometimes you can get a 4th attempt if it's like for an all-time world record or an American record or world record or whatever, but typically it's 9 attempts and that's your day.
Gotcha. And what are the, I'm assuming there's different leagues, right? Like sometimes you can wear like a squat suit or a bench suit or stuff like that, or assisted or unassisted?
There's about 52 million different federations for powerlifting, but typically you have a couple options. Raw is either sleeves or knee wraps, and then you have geared lifting, which is anywhere from single ply, like say bench shirt or squat suit, to as many layers as you can possibly fit on you for multiply. I've competed in all of them. I used to do multiply when that was what was readily available in my community. But since then, about 8 years or so, Raw has really taken over most of powerlifting, and that's what it currently is either sleeves or knee wraps and a belt.
Gotcha. And what about straps? Are you allowed to use straps in these events, or
no straps in competition, just for silly human tricks and training.
Gotcha. Okay, so I think grip strength will be coming up a little bit later in this episode. Definitely something we want to hit on, because with obstacle course racing, that is pretty much our bread and butter besides running speed. So before we get into that though, take us through like a weekly training schedule when preparing for a powerlifting meet.
I train 4 days a week, so I'm Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, and so you break that up usually into 2 upper bodies and 2 lower bodies. So for me, particularly, it'd be deadlift on Sunday, bench on Monday, squat on Wednesday, bench on Friday, repeat. And depending on how far you are from a competition, depends on what kind of volume you're hitting, what kind of intensity you're hitting. I also do some cardio, so I'm not purely just strength, but it's very minimal, and it's pretty much just to keep me as a fairly functioning human being.
Nice. Yeah, I've seen some videos of powerlifters, and some of them, I mean, look like they're about to have a heart attack walking up to the lifting platform.
Well, I think there's a big difference between, you get your super heavyweights versus your lighter weight, whether it be male or female. Your lighter weight athletes tend to try to optimize their size and weight class versus your super heavies. More is better, right? So just more food.
Right. Yeah, that's more leverage you can use to,
right.
pull, squat
power
the weight.
belly. Exactly.
So when you're breaking up the training into those, essentially you're taking a work day and then a rest day immediately after. Kind of take us through the general mindset of, is that the max amount of essentially work you can put in and still, improve, or are there powerlifters who train more regularly or maybe train less regularly? Kind of take
there are
a
lot of different ways to do things, and I've tried just about every single one of them. A lot of times there is no one current best methodology out there. It's whatever your body is not used to will, elicit a training response. So if you're used to hitting, say, squats just once a week, then you might benefit from increasing your frequency to twice or maybe even 3 times a week for a little while. Obviously, it depends on how strong you are. If you're a person who is squatting triple body weight for reps, then you're going to take longer to recover than somebody who is just squatting body weight for reps. So, obviously there's a lot of different ways of doing it, and it comes down to individual. But if I'm going to paint some broad brush strokes, I would say your lighter, less, less strong athletes are going to be able to recover and benefit from a little bit more frequency versus your heavier or more seasoned elder athletes are going to need a little bit more time to recover in between things.
Cool. Yeah, I think you hit on some very important points there for some of our listeners. The, forcing your body to adapt and making it do something that it's not generally used to. So I think in obstacle course racing, we have a lot of, the people who come from a running background tend to go heavy on the running, and the people who come from a strength training or obstacle proficiency background tend to stick with what they're good at and don't put as much time into running. When if you force the adaptation, it'll obviously make you improve.
Absolutely, and that's why a lot of us have coaches, right? Because we'll naturally gravitate towards things that we're good at or things that we like, and we'll naturally avoid things that we don't like or are not as good at. And with any kind of training, whether it be OCR or triathlon or powerlifting or weightlifting, doesn't matter. If you don't like one particular part of that sport, then you're probably not going to do it. And forcing yourself to do it is only going to make you better. And I think it's important to have that kind of balance and sight on the entire program and the entire season, et cetera, et cetera. How you manage your training needs to match where your deficiencies are, and you can't always be going 100% always at the stuff that you're good at and ignore the stuff that you're not. You're going to have to cycle through it. Not to say you should ignore what you're good at. You don't want that to become lagging, but it definitely needs to be a focus to make yourself do what you don't want to do.
Gotcha. Yeah, I completely agree. So with improving 1 rep max, I think we have some athletes who are just getting into OCR who may not even be able to do a single pull-up. So Can you take us through some kind of rep schemes for improving 1 rep max? So if someone was trying to go from like 0 pull-ups to 1 pull-up, or maybe they're just going for a single rep max, heavier weighted pull-up.
Pull-ups are a little different than, say, like a compound movement such as like a squat. But this is what I would do for pull-ups. I would really focus on the negative. So I don't really like putting a band, hanging a band and stepping into it and doing pull-ups like that if you're not strong enough. To me, that's only helping you in the spot that you're already strong, and it's not really doing much in the spot that you're not. So I've found that I've had athletes that came to me that were like, I was told that body weight exercises are stupid for powerlifters. And I'm like, that's because you can't do them. So it is kind of stupid for you to do it. So let's work on that. And I took this, he's probably about 240 at the time, 20-year-old kid, and he couldn't do 1 pull-up. And by the time he got done with me, he was adding on, it was only like 15 pounds, but he was still adding on weight and doing multiple singles or doubles or triples. So, it wasn't like stupendous, I'm going to write home and write a blog about how I did this. It's just solid gains. And what I did was really focused on the negative. So I'll have people do jumping pull-ups. So you jump up to the top, and then, 3, 4, 5 second lowering of down, and then jump back up to the top. And then eventually what that's going to do is you're going to be able to lift yourself back up to the top without having to jump. And getting that first one sets the stage, because then you can do it. And then you try to go 2 or 3 or 4. So a lot of times I started out with like 4 sets of 4. And if you can only do jumping, fine. But do those negatives and be really slow and methodical about it and stay tight. And eventually, instead of doing 4 singles, we'll maybe go 2 by 2 or 3 by 1 and just slowly increase the intensity. I've found that if you really want to work on a 1 rep max, which was the other part of your question.
Yep.
One, let's assume that we have some training under our belt, right? Like you're not gonna give me a brand new person who's never lifted a weight and let's go establish a 1 rep max. That's not gonna work. You need some training. You need some volume in there. You need to get that mind muscle connection. You need to know what you're doing. But let's say that you give me someone who, hey, I've been training for 6 months. I think I want to do a powerlifting meet. What's going to get me to optimize my 1 rep max? The short answer is doing heavier loads. I have done Bulgarian method, which is very high intensity, multiple times a week. It worked well for 3 months, and then the sky fell in and everything crashed down because I was overtrained, because I wasn't giving myself enough variation, because I wasn't giving myself enough opportunity to actually recover. So if you want to, your 1 rep max is highly neurological adaptation. You have to have the muscle there to do it, but it's making the brain tell all of the muscles to work at the same time. Let's move this object or whatever it is. So specificity is key when it comes to training. And you're going to get better by doing 1 rep maxes, by doing 1 rep maxes, or damn near close to it. Doubles, triples, singles. But the caveat to that is that you can't keep that going on for too long, because your body will eventually give you the middle finger, and then you're going to either be nursing injury, which is going to force you to deload, or you're just going to walk into the gym and all of a sudden you can't bench press 90% of what you did 2 days before. So, long story short, or short story long, that's how you do it.
Gotcha. So you said when you were doing the Bulgarian method, you hit a point of overtraining. So for you, was what personally was that? Did you end up getting injured, or did you have to lower the weight and you found you couldn't do them anymore? Or was there something else?
Yeah, I had to lower the weight. I went from, let's easy math say, I bench pressed 200 pounds for like a couple weeks, 200, 201, 202, et cetera, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, I couldn't even bench press 190, 180. And I'm like, wait a minute. I didn't feel bad necessarily. I wasn't excited about training, but, you know, that happens. And then I also started ignoring some, this kind of hurts, but it's fine, and, you know, ignoring little things. And I've learned over my multitude of years in sport that you don't want to ignore your body. You don't necessarily want to embrace everything that hurts all the time, but you need to understand why something hurts and, you know, do a risk assessment. Is this worth the potential long-term injury to work around or work through this injury versus let's just take the time off right now and heal this up? I didn't really necessarily have any injuries per se, but I had some little nagging things that probably were keeping me from getting into the right positions. And a lot of it, I think, was just hormonal, where your body just kind of goes, you know, no, we're not recovering. So I've changed my methodologies a lot since then, but it still taught me some valuable lessons.
Gotcha. Definitely some good advice in there for obstacle course racers. We have a tendency to, you know, go balls to the wall all the time and, you know, not take rest weeks or not take down weeks or not, you know, race every weekend. And I
think longevity in any sport is pretty simple. Not easy necessarily, because we're human and we like to do stupid things, but it's pretty easy. Stress, rest. Stress, rest. But you need that rest part. You know, it's easy to get caught up in the motivational memes of, well, you know, somebody out there is working harder than you right now because you're sitting on your butt resting. But if you don't sit on your butt to rest, then you're not going to recover. And if you don't recover, how are you going to force the next adaptation and actually get stronger or faster or better cardiovascular conditioning or whatever the case may be, right? So stress and rest. That rest, especially if you want to not just be a, you know, one race wonder or, you know, let's get to the top apex of your sport for 2 years and then all of a sudden, who are we talking about?
Right.
You know, I love my sport, so I want to be doing it for as long as possible, which means let's have a long-term view of training and know when to push and when to calm down just a little bit. You'll be fine. And it's a hard balance, especially mentally, to do.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, I think even myself on social media and stuff like that, we always post our workouts and stuff like that, but there's also rest days mixed in there, and that's how you're recovering and actually getting better by letting your body heal. And most people don't talk about that. Like, I took a rest day yesterday. I just hung out with my family. I didn't really do anything, but I wasn't like posting like, oh, sick rest day today, you know. Laid on the couch for 2 hours, took a nap. It was awesome, you know.
Although 2-hour naps on the couch, especially if you have a fur baby, are absolutely fabulous and should be posted more often.
Yeah, I don't have a fur baby. I have an actual baby, but
well, okay, that'll work too.
But she let me sleep on the couch, which was nice. So it was good. It was a good rest day. Speaking of, you know, recovering and resting, what is your taper week, or, you know, or how long do you taper for before a competition, or what is that kind of that peaking process look like for a powerlifter?
Usually it's about the last 6 weeks of, 6 weeks leading up into a powerlifting meet. You'll start to, and I'm just going to throw some numbers and percentages out there, and obviously take it with a grain of salt. But you might start out with, like, your first 6 weeks out, like 80% or 85%, and you slowly go maybe 85 to 90, 92, 95, maybe about 2 to 3 weeks out, and then you're really going to start tapering down accessory work. So those percentages were on, obviously my competition list, squat, bench, deadlift. But then you're going to be taking away some of the accessory movements, or instead of doing 4 sets, you might only do 3 sets. Instead of doing 12, you might do 8. So you need to, it's inversely proportional, your intensity and your volume. So you have to have less volume with higher intensity you go, but also pay attention to how hard you're going on your other lifts. Once again, going back to that, you need to know when to push and when not. That last 6 weeks, especially the last 2 to 3 weeks, you're probably going to be doing some of your heavier lifts. I'm 2.5 weeks out from my next competition. And yesterday I hit a new PR in my squat at 350 in sleeves. So that's just going to kind of an example of 2 weeks out, I have one more real squat day, which is next Wednesday. And then the next Wednesday would just be kind of blood flow, 40 to 60% of my 1 rep max, just for a couple doubles and singles, just to kind of make sure there's no rust building up and everything's feeling okay, because I'm going to be in a deficit at that point. There's always, whenever you have a weight class sport, you're always going to have some body manipulation in order to maximize how much you weigh for weigh-in versus how much you weigh when you actually compete. I have a 24-hour weigh-in, so I actually walk around a few pounds. We'll just leave it as a few pounds over my actual weight class that I compete in. So the last week, you really don't want to be doing much because I'm not going to have any carbs. It's going to be veggies and protein and like 1,200 calories. It's going to be horrible, miserable. But that's what the name of the game is, so that's what I do.
So since you do compete in a specific weight class, I'm assuming your goal is to keep as much lean muscle mass and as little body fat as possible, right?
Yeah, especially around competition time. Absolutely.
So what is your like day-to-day diet look like, or what's your training diet?
I fluctuate when I'm cutting. So if I'm 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on how fluffy I allow myself to get in an off season, my calories drop down pretty low. Non-training days, we're talking like 1,200. Training days, we're talking 1,500 to 1,900 for a person who's 5'1", 120-ish. Obviously, We're trying to push towards, the closer I am to 120, the easier, because I normally get like 6 to 8 pounds on a water cut. So I want to be within 6 pounds because I know that's my minimum that I get from the same procedure I do every single time. Mm-hmm. So I try not to be anything above that 120, maybe 121 if I'm pushing it, a week before the contest, because I know it's just going to be, I'm going to have to hot tub it more or sauna or whatever, manipulate even more. And then, that comes risk reward. That comes with the risk of not being able to properly hydrate and properly refeed, get the glycogen back, et cetera, et cetera. 'Cause like I said, I go pretty low carb the week before. But if you're like talking off season, like what am I going to be eating in November, December, when I don't have a competition for 2 to 3 months? I'm not afraid of carbs. I also will try to increase my aerobic activity just a little bit to burn a little bit more, but I'm usually going to be a little bit higher volume too, so I'm trying to build muscle. So there's always that. I'm off season, you try to build more muscle, and then you try to lose all the fluff that you gain while you're, living life and eating in the off season. And it's that constant back and forth throughout the year that is weight class sports.
Gotcha. So do you monitor macronutrients, or do you generally monitor calories? What's your
I do macros.
way of monitoring?
Yeah, okay. I do macros. I've been doing macros for 3, 4 5 years now. 2012 is when I think I really started paying attention to my diet. And that just works well for me. I sometimes pay attention to timing and I sometimes don't. It depends on how many calories I'm actually eating. Obviously, so if I'm a little bit higher on the calories, my nutrient timing isn't nearly as important as if I'm eating, 1,300 in training, mm-hmm. which I have before. I try not to go that low because it's miserable. But, then the timing becomes a little bit more important. But if you're over on your calories, then, I don't sweat it. I go, oh, okay. And if I'm not exactly on my macros, as long as I can hit calories next, right? So in the hierarchy, I try to hit my macros perfectly because I know if I hit my macros, then my calories are good. But if I go out to dinner with friends and they don't have, it's all pasta, there's no meat and vegetables to be had, then I go, okay, well, I'm not going to hit my macros exactly, but let's try to keep it in the same realm calorically.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So I know mindset is obviously very important when approaching a lifting platform or going for a new PR. And for obstacle course racing, while not exactly the same, we have these things called rigs that have like 12 to 16 holds on them that require traversing with your hands. And I know if I don't mentally prepare myself when running up to that rig, it's going to be a lot harder than if I know I'm about to go in and put in max effort to cross this thing. So kind of just take me through the mindset of you personally, or maybe other powerlifters that when you're preparing for like a 1 rep max lift.
I think it's going to be slightly different than for OCR. For me, for 1 rep max, I know that I just have to. It's going to last less than 10 seconds. So the misery is short, and I usually just going to kind of give myself a pep talk of just don't give up. Simply put, you're going to take this weight out. You're going to do all your cues like you're supposed to. You're going to keep your upper back tight or whatever I'm trying to tell myself at that point. And I'm going to trust in the process, and I'm going to trust that my coach wouldn't have me do this if he didn't think I was ready to do this. I know that I'm strong enough. This is what I've been training for. I'm gonna do it. With a 1 rep max, because you know that it's only going to last, let's say 10 seconds. For me, because that's the kind of athlete I am, that's a lot easier to grapple with than, like, say, a long-distance runner where, all right, let's really gear up for that 26-mile run that we have. You can't keep yourself mentally aroused for that many hours versus 10 seconds.
Right.
So, to me, the mindset would be slightly different, although I could see that if you have something like an obstacle that you are not good at, and that same kind of, I've been training this, I've been working on it, if I do everything I'm supposed to, I will pass it, I'll get through it, whatever the case. And, I think it's a trust in the process that helps me mentally get through those times where I don't want to do whatever I'm doing.
Gotcha. Good answer. I again also obviously agree. So I do very, very long distance obstacle course racing. We're talking hours and hours in length. But and for that, I'm pretty much on cruise mode almost the entire race. And my mind's just kind of wandering, doing whatever it does. And then the only time I really have to psych myself up is, like you said, when I'm approaching something that, I may be 5 hours into a race and I have to do an obstacle that I know is hard. So I have to, really focus for that, 100 meters leading up to it so I can put out max effort to cross this thing without problem. But
yeah, and I think that, just going with the approach of it's a finite amount of time. You're going to survive. You'll be okay. Just get through it. You'll probably surprise yourself. Because so a lot of people, before they even start the process, will give up on it. I mean, I've seen lifters. I've seen lifters where on their way down on the squat, they start shaking their head. Well, we know what's going to happen. Like they already know that they're not going to get it. So there's no chance that they are, because they've already given up on themselves. So you got to have that positive self-talk before you go try to accomplish any feat of whatever. If you let that doubt take over, then there's no way that you're going to get through that obstacle or get through that squat or whatever.
Do you use any specific mantra when you go up? I know some people like to repeat things over in their head.
For deadlift, because it's the last lift of the day, and especially like on my last attempt, I do. I have one thing that I say, and that's, this is what you came for. This is why you're here today. Let's go do this. It's very simple, but I tell myself that repeatedly. And it seems to work pretty well for me.
Nice. So, being a woman in a powerlifting sport, which I'm assuming is fairly male-heavy?
It used to be very, very much so. It's about 40-60 now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's really grown. When I first started, I would be the only female in a group of, 20, 40 people, or maybe there would be like 2 or 3 others. But it was like, hey, you're a woman, I'm a woman, let's be friends. And now it's like half of the whole meet is women. So it's actually grown exponentially. That's where most of the growth in powerlifting has been, is women and kids.
Cool. So what do you think has caused that rise? And then kind of when did that start? Was that 5 years ago or 20 years ago?
Lifting, I think, really was the impetus, especially for youth. And then with, powerlifters love to bash on CrossFitters. And
I feel like everyone likes to bash on CrossFitters. But go ahead.
And I'm like, if it gets more people into my sport, then why? Well, because they're not strong or what, they're not lifting enough weight or whatever. And it's like, that makes me look better. Shut up. I'm okay with that. Like, so you're going to, people don't knock other runners who do, a 5K turkey trot every Thanksgiving, and that's just because they're going to go run with their friends, and that's what they just are going to go do and going to have fun and whatever. They don't diss those average people who have just decided to do a race. So why do powerlifters feel like they should diss people who, hey, this is my first meet, I'm just going to try it out, I just started doing CrossFit, this sounded like fun? Like, why are you shooting yourself in the foot? I don't understand this. I was going to go somewhere with that, but I don't know where. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I think as for obstacle course racing, we're fairly welcoming to new people, just because so there's typically only one elite wave or one competitive wave where people are legitimately running for time and they care about placement, and then the other 80 to 90% of the race is people just out there to have a good time.
See, and I think that's one thing that a lot of other sports are doing correctly. That I think that powerlifting wants to be like, look at me, look how strong I am, when if you really want to grow the sport and you really want to grow your clientele that, you're coaching or that you're selling supplements to, or you're selling whatever little gimmicky devices or whatever, knee sleeves, whatever, then you don't want to put down the people who are just trying it out and just going to be weekend warriors. That's where your bread and butter is. Those are the people who are putting money into the pot to allow the competitions to grow.
Right.
So I think
that's where all the
powerlifting,
prize money comes from. Like
right.
Without, especially for obstacle course racing, without that 80 to 90%, like there would be no race because it costs too much money to build and put on the obstacles. Like we just wouldn't have races. So.
Exactly, and that's where I think the problem with powerlifting has been is that they don't curtail enough to the new lifters and the 80 to 90% of people who are not elite. And I think that having a good experience for everyone, not just the elite. Like I've been invited to like the U.S. Open and Boss of the Bosses and some of the bigger powerlifting meets in the country. And although I love how I'm treated there, like, oh, you're so awesome. And I who doesn't like have their ego inflated? But what really is paying the bills is, like you said, you know, when I go to a local meet that has 120 lifters and I could beat even the guys, but that's okay because that's what's growing the sport, and that's where the money's at, is the masses.
Yep, absolutely. So kind of piggybacking off that question, moving forward with powerlifting, like I know in obstacle course racing, our big thing right now is one, you know, people want to get more TV exposure, and that seems to be happening with some of the races. And then the other big push is there's this, you know, people want to get obstacle course racing into the Olympics. So, you know, from the powerlifting side, is there similar talk? Do people even care about that stuff, or?
Oh, well, okay, so like I said, there are a bunch of federations. And the one federation that has the closest ties with the IOC is USAPL or IPF. USAPL is the American affiliate. IPF is the international affiliate. IPL, IPF, whatever. And so they are in talks with the IOC, and they've been courting them for as long as I've been lifting. But this is, if you ask me what my rational brain thinks and what my heart thinks, there are two different answers. I would love to see powerlifting in the Olympics. However, it's boring. And the IOC doesn't want boring sports. They want, I mean, weightlifting is having a hard enough time. And you're going to bring in another weightlifting-like sport?
Right.
Like, wrestling is having a hard enough time to getting people to watch. Because they want to, it's a business, right? Like, they want to sell those commercial spots and they want to sell stuff. And so in order for you to sell stuff, you have to have people who want to watch something. And if it's boring, then people ain't going to watch it. They could make powerlifting a little bit more entertaining with editing, but that would be about the only way. You know, a 4-hour powerlifting meet, cut it down into a highlight video of 6 minutes, and boom, that would probably work. But unless it's, unfortunately, I think the writing's on the wall. Unless it's going to be entertaining, and unless you can sell, it's not going to get there. So, you know, maybe with OCR, you have enough highlight spots of people jockeying for position. I mean, they do it on the other races that they have. You know, biking isn't necessarily long distance biking isn't the most exciting thing ever, but yet they can still edit it together and make it fairly entertaining. So I think that as long as you still have that capability with whatever sport that you're trying to get into the Olympics, you have a shot. But I don't think powerlifting's chances are all that high. Although it is it's a para-Olympic sport. Bench press is a para-Olympic sport. So we're kind of there.
Mm. I think one of my favorite things you just said was it's a business. And I think people forget that sometimes, that even the Olympics are, you know, they make money. They're a money-making machine. I just read a book. What was it called? It was like the history of the Olympics, and it was to see the growth and like the, you know, some of the ideals at the beginning were like, oh, this is such a pure sporting endeavor, and then you can see its transformation, and then it really takes off, like, post 1950, and they start adding all these sponsors, and there's like $1 billion for television rights.
I would even say that possibly you go back to even like the 1936 Olympics with Hitler's Olympics, and that was really like the first one with all the pomp and circumstance, and that has pretty much, we've adapted that. Hey, we like this. Okay, let's sell the city, let's sell the country, let's sell the, idea of the perfect whatever. And there was a lot of propaganda and manipulation then, and we've been doing it ever since. So if you look historically, I would suggest that it goes back from then.
You're spot on. I can't remember the name of the book, like I said, but they pointed out Hitler, like the modern Olympics are essentially, it's like we don't want to admit it, but it's from Hitler, right?
Yeah.
Because he said when he held the 1936 Olympics, he said, in Berlin, it was, well, this is a 1,000-year Reich, so every 4 years the Olympics will be held in Berlin. So we're going to make it the best event ever, and because we're going to reuse this facility in 4 years, and then 4 years again after that, and 4 years. So they built all the athlete housing. They made it such a spectacular event. And then after that, people wanted to...
And they hid all of their ghettos, and they put lipstick and rouge and new paint on all of their storefronts to show how well off and economically booming they are doing. And if you look at Rio, they did the same thing. They tried to show us how, what a great country they are, how they're thriving, yet news reports comes out to the opposite. But it's still this propaganda machine.
Oh, right on. I hear you. So I feel like powerlifting would have an easier time because, like you said, there's already, strength sports or weightlifting sports in the Olympics. It seems like it'd be easier just to add another, add a powerlifting event underneath the umbrella of Olympic lifting. Is that not the case?
No, because people and their traditions, people are silly, and they don't want to do that. I think there's there's pushback in the weightlifting community. They don't want to open up the ranks for these silly little powerlifters. And I just don't think that powerlifting is, like I said, I just don't think that it's entertaining enough. I think that strongman would have a better chance of getting into the Olympics than powerlifting.
Yeah,
so pretty much any other sport.
I had Cal Beck on the podcast, I can't remember, a bunch of episodes ago, and we kind of had we had a similar discussion talking about the Olympics, and strongman and obstacle course racing, part of their similarity is that they use non-standard stuff. So there's, at least from the obstacle course racing side, people don't want to see standardization. They don't want it to be like, all right, every monkey bars in every race will be, 15 feet with, 10 rungs separated by X number of inches. So there's this aversion to standardization because at least I think the thing that makes obstacle course racing interesting and great is there's such varied obstacles and such varied terrain and distances that it's really anybody's race in a lot of these races where, you can have multiple lead changes, and I've gone from like 15th place up to 3rd in the last 50 meters of a race because people were stuck at obstacles.
Yeah, that's definitely, an interesting point that you have powerlifting and a lot of these other sports that, you can't have baseball. You have certain standards for bats, and you have certain standards for balls. You have certain standards for, everything. And so you're like super, super strict. And then you have stuff like OCR and strongman, which is like, hey, what are we doing today, boys? I don't know. What are we doing? Let's go do this thing. Oh, I'm going to sign up for a competition. I don't know what's in it. It's going to be a surprise. I mean, you don't even know until the day of the competition.
Yeah, sometimes they put out maps and they have mystery obstacles on the maps.
Yeah, which is nuts, right? Like that would be difficult for my brain to be able to just, adapt on the fly. Because I know, how the bench is going to fit, and hell, we even get upset when the standards, like squat rack or bench or whatever, are not to the standards that we're used to, and then you'll have people complain. Let alone if it was like just kind of randomly set up. Okay, we're going to have a bench, but we don't know how tall it's going to be, and we don't know how much the bar is going to weigh, and we don't know the circumference of the bar. It's just going to be whatever it is. That would definitely change the sport. It'd be interesting.
So also one of the things with obstacle course racing is there was a push for it to go under another sport. So there was talk about like modern pentathlon of like somehow squeaking in under them for obstacle course racing to the Olympics. So I know from the obstacle course racing side, like I don't think that's beneficial. Like I think the name needs to go with it. Like it should say obstacle course racing, not modern pentathlon. So with powerlifting, is there an aversion, would you say, from the powerlifting side, or is it mainly from the Olympic lifters who are like, we don't want to let powerlifters in? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit already.
I'm really kind of speaking out of my butt.
Okay.
But I think it's more of like powerlifting would want to be called powerlifting. They wouldn't want to be. I don't think they want it to be, okay, what can you do for a super total? And a super total is a clean, a jerk, a squat, bench, and deadlift. Which would be interesting because that would be definitely, because the Olympic lifts are more finesse, they're more technical.
Right.
And so if you get out of groove on a clean and jerk or a snatch, then you're probably not going to make it. You get out of groove a little bit on a bench or a squat or a deadlift, and you can kind of fight it back in and lock it out. Now, you can't do that necessarily on a 1-rep max and a true 1-rep max, but there's a little bit more grindability. Oh, let's correct something that gets a little bit out of spot. So that it would take definitely like two different types of training. But I just don't. I don't think that that's how if it would ever go into the Olympics, I think it would be separate. It wouldn't be, let's add 3 more events to weightlifting. It would be, this is powerlifting. It's a new sport.
Got it. Okay, before we take it off and wrap up this interview, I wanted to touch on some grip strength stuff. So if you had someone who's, working on their deadlift and can't seem to hold on to the bar, what would you recommend for grip strength improvement as a powerlifter?
Grip for, like, my sport and grip for your sport are slightly different. And I don't know necessarily why. It just seems to be. Like, I knew this one kid that I trained for a little while, and he could do weighted pull-ups, and his grip never gave out whenever he had his hands over his head, and he was holding himself up. But I would program deadlifts, and I'd be like, okay, do 85% for 5, which you should be able to do. And he's like, my grip is giving out. My grip is giving out. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. You have great grip strength on these other things, but yet, but to answer your question, more grip. So if you're going to do deadlift, warm up double overhand grip because we normally, so there's 2 different ways to grab a bar to deadlift. There's a hook grip, which you kind of smash your thumb in between the bar and your hand, and that's how you hold it. That's how Olympic lifters typically hold their bars. And then you have a mixed grip, which is one hand is over and one hand is under. So one pronated, one is supinated. And so that kind of keeps the bar from rolling out one direction. So if you grab the bar double overhand, it's going to want to roll back to you, right? It's going to want to roll out of your fingers. So one way to work on that is to, one, try not to use straps. So you try to, for any assistance exercise, try to use just your hands. And then, like, if you're doing, like I said, deadlifts, warm up double overhand and really try to hold it there at the top in your hands to give that extra training stimulus to your grip. So what I would say, we have at the gym, this little pull-up adapter that you can stick your fingers in. They're like little udders, but you stick your fingers in, and it's just the very, first knuckle of your finger can slide in. So you can do pull-ups based on that, with that. We also have, shafts where you can grip around it, and you can do pull-ups on those. So different implements while you're doing the pull-ups to give you a slightly different grip position. We also have balls that you can, hold on to. So I would think that possibly that would be good carryover for an OCR person or someone who's doing American Ninja Warrior or rock climbing or, any of those things where you're holding yourself up a lot. The different training stimuluses and different ways to do that would work slightly different muscles in your hands and forearms and upper back and allow you to hold on a little bit better.
Right on. Good answers there. So before we finally take off, where can people find you or follow you on social media? And if they're interested in getting into powerlifting, what do you recommend is the best website or route to go about researching that information?
Well, I'm on Instagram, Jay Rotsinger. On Facebook, Jen Rotsinger. I'm the only one in the world, so I'm easy to find. Complete Human Performance, we have all kinds of training. So even if you were an OCR athlete and you decided that, hey, I want to get a little stronger, my legs are always weak I can't climb over this wall or I can't do whatever. We have coaches who do that, but we also have coaches who, obviously, myself, and others who do powerlifting coaching. So the nice thing about our philosophy is that we can get you ready for that OCR meet, and we can also simultaneously get you ready for a powerlifting meet. Obviously, it's best to have them kind of spread out, but you can still simultaneously train, and they have some carryover from one to the other. Getting stronger is never a bad thing. So you can check out our services there, CompleteHumanPerformance.com. And as far as just getting into the sport, I would just try to find a local event and go check it out. Go meet people. Go talk to people. Say, hey, where do you train? Can I jump in and train with you? The powerlifting community is still pretty old school as far as welcoming and, hey, you like this? I like this. Let's go do this together. It's getting a little bit more, okay, if you like this, I like this, why don't you pay me to do this? But you can still find pockets of people who train together and just help each other out. And that's where I would try to fall into a powerlifting-specific gym in order to learn powerlifting is really the best way to do it. So there you go.
Cool. Yeah, big fan of Complete Human Performance. I've written articles for them in the past, and your guys' coaching staff is deep. I mean, there's people you can find for pretty much any sport, and their knowledge crosses over real well. When I started Strength and Speed a couple of years ago, so it was before I got into obstacle course racing. I was actually doing marathon running, and then I would do triathlon for 4 months, and then I'd switch to something like powerlifting, although I didn't actually compete in any sanctioned meets. It was just me and my friends lifting heavy in the gym. And then I would do bodybuilding for a couple months and then back to the beginning. So I was looking for an organization that does both, and I just couldn't find it. So I was all right, well, I'll just kind of create my own, and that's kind of what I did. And then got into obstacle course racing. So my website initially started off as it was supposed to be hybrid training, just like Complete Human Performance, but it kind of strayed into OCR because that's what I've been into the last about 3 years. So
yeah, I have one of our coaches, Alec Blennis. He does a lot of OCR coaching, obviously long distance running, et cetera, et cetera. And we've shared athletes before, and Yeah, he had one. He was like, hey, I got a guy who wants to do a powerlifting meet. How much time do you need? And I go, well, I'd like 12 weeks, to make it powerlifting-specific training for a 12-week cycle. Usually has pretty good results on a platform. So that's what I'd like to do. And that's the beauty of that organization is that you can go, no hard feelings. You don't have to break up with your coach. You don't have to go, oh, well, it's not personal and have all that weirdness. It's just like, hey, cool. You want to go do this? I'm going to put you under the tutelage of this coach right now. And then if you want to come back and do this again with me, then that's cool too. And you don't have that kind of weirdness of breaking up with a coach or, change. It's a pretty easy transition from one to another.
Yeah, and Alec, I don't know if he's still racing now, but he used to race a lot and was very good. So obviously knows what he's talking about. And I remember him posting some videos a couple of years ago, him doing some lifts that he's putting up some pretty serious weight. So
yeah, he's been getting a lot stronger lately.
Is he still racing OCR, or has he phased that out?
I haven't seen him post anything OCR specific. He's been kind of vacant from social media lately, other than he just went and got a bunch of bananas. But other than that, like...
It's good to know.
Yeah, right? Like, his fridge is full of bananas by right now. Just FYI, and yeah, August 2017. But, yeah, I know he's definitely still coaching, and he's still working on stuff. I'm not quite sure what he's up to, though.
And also, I think Nicodemus Holland, does he still work for you guys, or did he work for you?
Yeah, he's one of our coaches. Sure.
Yep. Yeah, so another ultra runner that also, he usually comes out to the 24-hour World's Toughest Mudder event in Las Vegas every year. So mostly ultra runner, but he does obstacle course racing stuff too. And also probably a good wealth of knowledge there. All right, well, that's kind of it. Any final shout-outs you want to give to any people or companies or anything like that before we take off?
No, I can't think of anything because I'm horrible at that kind of thing.
All right, Jen. Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast. Definitely some great lessons learned and some good information here. I'm sure our listeners will enjoy. And we'll talk to you again in the future. Thanks so much.
All right, sounds good. All right, thanks. Bye.